Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing in partnership with the Sunderland Fan Museum. Well, the morning after the night before, gents, it's January transfer windows now shut. First of all, obviously, Dom, you're joining us. How are you doing, mate?
I'm good. I'm yourself. Tired,
Yeah,
fueled by coffee.
Oh yeah, that's me on the normal work day. Never mind on the transfer deadline day. Yourself, Joe, how are you?
Yeah, tired. A little bit croaky in the voice. I think I've suffered a bit of the January blues in terms of my illness as well. So, but no, it's nice to be through it, isn't it? And it's nice to sort of, obviously, we're going to reflect on it today, but it's just going to be nice to just get back to the football, isn't it? And that being the only thing to talk about, rather than what could or couldn't happen, or might not happen, and should and shouldn't, etc., etc. So, yeah, it's been a long week. It's been a long month, really. I mean, you could go back to Michael Beale's appointment. It's been a long 6 or 7 weeks, really, hasn't it?
Yeah.
A lot has changed in the landscape of Sunderland, not just with yesterday's deadline.
Yeah, it was a weird month in January, like across the board, Premier League, Championship, but particularly covering Sunderland. There was just been that much stuff that sort of detracted away from the actual window itself. I mean, you look back, you had the FA Cup tie, you had the fallout of that, you had, pressure on Michael Beale. It's until yesterday, from my point of view anyway, it didn't really feel like a transfer window at all until maybe at least the start of this week when they brought in Leo Hjelde.
No, I totally agree. And you can almost say there's been a benefit in that distraction, and then not with the way things have arguably played out, because the focus has been away from that. There hasn't been as much sort of pressure, if you will, on the club to try and get deals in, because there has been a lot of background noise, hasn't there, with all sorts of things, like you say, with the cup game, the form, the sort of frustrations aimed at Beale, the Alex Pritchard situation. There's been one thing after another over the course of the last month, and like I say, even beyond that with Beale's appointment, that it hasn't been until this final week and these final few days where everyone's kind of collectively gone, oh, hold on a second, there's a transfer window here and we're kind of running out of time. And it did almost get to that point. Also, it feels like that to me. I think obviously the first player, Leo Hjelde came in, I think it was Wednesday, and then obviously two yesterday. It felt a little bit rushed, if I'm being honest. I'm not saying there hasn't been obviously background gone into those players, because I think we spoke yesterday, didn't we, when we went live, that you can see why those types of players have been brought in. But Christian Speakman mentioned that the market's not really moved much. It's been quite a strange transfer window across the board. I think I was looking this morning, and even like if we look at the Premier League, it's the lowest spend for a number of years in the Premier League. And the Championships felt a little bit like that as well. I know there's been more movement, and we'll come on to perhaps players who've gone elsewhere. Kiefer Moore being a prime example, but yeah, it's felt a bit of a strange window for me.
Yeah, just before obviously going to some of the players that they've brought in, some of the departures that have left, I find it interesting that at the start and throughout, the window, they spoke about the need for a left back. They've brought strength in that area in particular. There was talk, wasn't there, of a holding midfielder, a designated number 6. Now, they brought Callum Styles in, and just from doing obviously a bit of analysis, what sort of player he is, he doesn't seem to fit that mould. And then obviously the main talking point is a striker, and I think Tony Mowbray mentioned it, repeatedly. Michael Beale has, and then Christian Speakman's touched on it. Just looking at the window as a whole, Dom, I mean, what have you made of Sunderland's business?
The striker's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially given the surprise exit of if someone had said to me on the morning of deadline day, there's going to be striker movement today, then I would never imagine that it'd have been one out rather than one in. I think what's more surprising about the Mayenda deal is I asked Michael Beale about the possibility of Hamia or Mayenda going out on loan a couple of weeks ago, and I kind of framed it as if you bring someone in, is there a possibility that they go out on loan? Beale categorically said that Hamia was a possibility, but suggested that Mayenda, basically the indication was that even if Mayenda isn't going to play a prominent role in the second half of the season, they feel he's better progressing under kind of watchful eye of the club's coaches on the training ground, playing for the under-21s. Now, clearly that's changed. Nick Montgomery, who's the Hibs manager, has a good record with young players, obviously worked with Nectar Triantis, and Triantis has gone back there. So I understand that. On the flip side, playing in the Scottish Premiership for an 18-year-old kid who's still getting the grips, like, it's rough and tumble, that, isn't it? That's difficult. So we'll see how that works out. In terms of bringing a striker in, it was clearly extremely difficult across the board. So we know Ipswich got Keeper Moore. By all accounts, their financial package that they put together made them clear favourites there. Hull, with the signings they made, were the same. They kind of blew their rivals out of the water. Sunderland weren't the only club to be left frustrated in the search for a striker. Cardiff wanted one. Middlesbrough wanted one. It was a difficult window, and I know Joe touched on it there. I think the knock-on effect from a few things, really. I think the Everton FFP ruling and the points deduction scared clubs in the Premier League.
Yeah.
So therefore, spending was down, and the knock-on effect of that was maybe exits weren't sanctioned that would have been. The African Cup of Nations and the Asian Cup ongoing, I think, had an impact. The fact clubs had players away. And the other thing is injuries. Injuries have spiked this season, haven't they? Every club seems to have had to manage with an injury crisis at some stage. I think that's had a knock-on effect as well. The top and bottom of it is Sunderland are left with 3 strikers who've scored 2 goals between them. And if they don't make the top 6 this season, you can't help but feel it's what's going to cost them. Yeah,
just interestingly on that point you made about, moves to the Scottish Premiership, if we stick with Mayenda for a minute, you look back at, Newcastle up the road, they sent Garan Kual there last year. That didn't particularly work out. Amad Diallo as well, he didn't have the best of time at Rangers. But then after that, his Sunderland spell, it needs no sort of introduction as to how that went. But it can make or break players, can't it? So, as you say, Nick Montgomery's got a decent enough reputation for developing young players, but it is an interesting destination. I know we've spoken on here in articles about the destination of the players. Do they send them abroad so they can play at a decent enough standard? Do they keep them here so that the English isn't impacted too much? They can still learn. It's an interesting destination, the Scottish Premiership, isn't it? Yeah, it is. For all the and I guess you look at Ahmad's example. Did he flourish at Sunderland because of his tough time at Rangers, or did he flourish at Sunderland because he had kind of Tony Mowbray, a really good man manager who put an arm around his shoulder and nurtured the very best out of him? Only time will tell. I guess he's only up the road, so Sunderland, you would hope, are going to be able to keep a close eye on him on and off the pitch, really, because he's an 18-year-old lad still adapting to new surroundings. Everything you've heard from Mowbray, from Beale, has been really positive on my end. How sharp he's looked on the training ground. I completely get why Sunderland haven't put him in. Given the situation with Sunderland strikers, an 18-year-old kid could easily drown under that pressure, couldn't they? So I do get that. Hamia looks like a player who maybe would have benefited more from a loan. But then does Sunderland look at it and think, well, we're not bringing anyone in. Hamia is more likely to play a part for us in the second half of the season. Roussan and Burstow, the two, aren't they? But they need to step up now. But especially Burstow, I think, after that goal, he talked about how he's self-doubt in the first half of the season. Confidence took a hit, but now he wants to kick on. He has to be true to his word, really. And I think, just finally, one or the other now could do with a prolonged spell in the team. They could do with Beale saying to Burstow, I'm going to give you 5 games. No matter what happens at Boro on Sunday or the game beyond that, I'm going to give you 5 games now, just to take the heat off a little bit so that the striker isn't getting subbed off after 65, 70 minutes thinking, that's my chance done. I'm going to be on the bench again next week. What do you reckon, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about that on Monday, didn't we? In terms of like looking back on the Stoke game with Burstow scoring, because I kind of advocated that for Roussan after he scored against Preston, but then he went into that Newcastle game and he was on hiding to nothing all afternoon that day. Just the way that Sunderland set up the step up in quality as well. He was completely isolated up against their 2 centre backs that day, and then he was left out at the starting 11 at Ipswich. So any momentum he could have built from the goal against Preston just evaporated within 2 games. That can't happen this time. I totally agree with what you're saying in terms of Burstow now. It's got to go that way because he's the one who's coming off the back of a goal. He's got to be the one that probably starts on Sunday. And then, like you say, trust him to. You've got to at this point, because they're the three strikers who are left in the building. He's the one who's come off the back of a goal, so now he has to be the one leading the line. And you're only going to get consistency if you get consistency in terms of being selected and given minutes. I think, touching on my end, I know he's only started the one game, I think, against Huddersfield, but is there a case to be made that Sunderland have kind of ironically weakened themselves coming out of this window up front?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, it's certainly something that you look at, isn't it? Because beforehand, we're all sat there. I mean, it's a drum I've banged just on about, going with a striker up front and sticking with it, having consistency. But mine was more Joe Bellingham when he had that patch over Christmas where he played up front. You can't argue that they've got less bodies in the building now. And I think, like we said, I do think the loan for my ender would be, I do think it'll work out in Sunderland's favour. As you say, we touched on the Amad Diallo stuff, but again, it's the not bringing somebody in to replace that. I get, there's loads of things that come into it, the finances. It's difficult to look at the squad, particularly up front, and say that they've strengthened, because again, Romain Mundell, he's a succession plan, isn't he, for one of the wide areas? But again, centrally, it's hard to see where the goals are going to come from unless one of the three that are now left goes on a run of scoring goals.
How do you think this squad now stacks up with the squad a year ago after Stewart's injury? So when Sunderland were left with Gellar, but obviously they had Amad. How do you think this squad now stacks up to that one?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, realistically, Sunderland have needed a go-to ready-made striker since Ross Stewart went down injured a little over a year ago against Fulham. Ellis Sims had gone back to Everton. They can't have legislated for Stewart getting injured, and I know that only left them with a week of the window, so it was obviously difficult at that point. They brought Gellar in to accompany and complement Stewart. Didn't get one in then. They brought four sort of untried, certainly three untried in terms of their age this summer, and then obviously Rusin more experience in terms of the age on his birth certificate, but he's coming over into a difficult situation. Me and Matty spoke about this in terms of where is his best position. There's some argument to be made. Is he across the front three, perhaps more in one of the wider areas? Maybe. So they've still needed it, and then they still need it now coming out of this window. So that is a question that is going to be thrown at Christian Speakman whenever he addresses the window. It may not be through the lack of trying. I doubt that it is through the lack of trying. We spoke about Kiefer Moore, and they've certainly held firm in terms of not breaking their wage structure and the finances to bring someone like that in. And you can understand both sides of the coin to that, can't you? Because if you do that, then you're stepping away from what they're believing in with this philosophy and this approach. But then at the same time, to what extent do you need to bring someone like that in? So it is a difficult situation. But I think you'd have to say the squad, it look at the top end of the field, it's weaker, isn't it? You're losing Amad Diallo. I think he had 18 goal contributions last season. Stewart, I think he scored 11 in 13 or 14 games. That hasn't been replaced. Jack Clark has stepped up and taken the burden on from, say, Diallo, but then there hasn't been a replacement in that. And, Patrick Roberts' numbers are down this season in terms of outright goals and assists. He obviously still brings a lot to the table in the final third, but they haven't replaced those numbers that have gone out. And to that extent, you could say that full credit to them for being where they're at and still being certainly within in touching distance of the top six, because if you've taken that amount of goals and assists out of your team, you shouldn't really have a right to be still within the conversation as strongly as they are. I do worry, though, that going into the second half of the season, that might just catch up with them at the end of this window.
And sorry, Matty, just to jump in one more, that you kind of do have to remind yourself where Sunderland are in the table, I think, because everything, I think it's what's happened off the pitch over the last few weeks and everything that's surrounded the club and Beale. It's easy to forget that they are still, this season is still very much alive.
I think that's where a lot of frustration comes from, though, isn't it? Is just how close they are and fans can see. And, Tony Mowbray said, Michael Beale said that the areas there are clear that Sunderland need to address. Now, particularly up front, they haven't. Whether we see Styles operate in more of a central midfield role and in a busy, energetic, win the ball back type role, we'll see. But that is what I think fans' frustration comes from. I know some of the travelling press pack after the defeat to Hull. Like, look, that defeat at Hull at home was poor. It was a bad performance. That was, that was one of those where we thought, well, if Beale then loses to Stoke, that could be it. That's how bad that display was. They won against Stoke. That results now in the past. But that's the frustration and the crux of it all. I think, the travelling press pack was saying, how can there be this such resentment after defeat? Hull are still up there as well. If you look at it on the face of things, Sunderland got beat off a playoff rival that day, but it's just how close they are. I think that's where the frustration comes from, and obviously, as we've touched on, everything in the background that's gone with it.
But I think that's come from Speakman as well in the summer. He kind of addressed and said, it was great. It was a great first year back, but nobody's satisfied with just the playoffs. We want to kick on and advance, and and that is the right mindset and mentality to have. It's Sunderland in the Championship. Whether there's, that could be perceived as slight arrogance or not, because there's a lot of teams who'll probably feel like that. But Sunderland in the Championship, historically really take. I know they've obviously come, and that's the juxtaposition, isn't it? Because there's the narrative of they've come out of League One for 4 years, and there's a kind of, oh, look where we're at, we're doing well. And you contrast that with, this is Sunderland in the Championship, they should really be competing to get out of it. And it's finding that balance between those two aspects for me. And the transfer window itself, if you look at Ipswich, they're doing it one way in terms of throwing money at it and really trying to build on that wave of momentum that Sunderland had 12 months ago coming out of League One. And they're right up there, and they're trying to really kick on and force it over the line this year. If it doesn't work, it'll obviously be interesting to see how it goes for them in the summer and next season. Sunderland are doing it a different way. And at the minute, there's a clear... They haven't threatened the top two once this season, really. They've been... that's no shame and disrespect, because the sides that are up there, Ipswich and Leicester absolutely raced away at the start. Leicester continue and Ipswich have dropped, but the gap between the Premier League as well is getting wider, and it's making it more difficult. So you're kind of only fighting for 2-3 places at most in the playoffs, and there's that many teams every season who can try and get in. It is tough. It really is.
It's a message from within as well, isn't it? Every new player that comes in is, we're going for promotion. We are going for this. It's not unreasonable for fans to then turn around and question and say, well, look, this is what the noise is coming from in the club. There was the background noise comment last week, but fans, it's all about managing expectation, isn't it? You can't then turn around and go to fans and say, well, your expectations are too high, when the message has been, we are going for promotion.
So,
no, that's absolutely right. I don't know if Dom, I think you'd agree, wouldn't you, Dom?
Yeah, that's clear. As you say, that's clearly that. As soon as you say something like that, you're a hostage to what comes next, and you're a hostage to what follows. But then, on the back of what Joe said about Ipswich, I mean, you look at Hull, for example. Fabio Carvalho, Ryan Giles, and Asta Rory from Burnley. It doesn't. You don't have to be an accountant to work out how they've managed to get those deals over the line. They've clearly offered significantly more than everybody else. And you look at those players. Hull are one of the teams, alongside Sunderland and Boro and Coventry, West Brom, who were fifth in there already. There's 5 or 6 teams, aren't there, who really fancy themselves, or would fancy themselves, for those last 2 places. Now, on the back of the window, you'd put Hull now in as more likely than Sunderland, as bigger favourites than Sunderland. Coventry are flying. West Brom, they've kind of been relatively solid, haven't they? But then you don't know how these signings are going to work out either, do you? There's clearly a balance there. Where Sunderland... Signing a striker in January is always incredibly difficult, isn't it? As various clubs have found out. Sunderland signed 4 in the summer. What they won't have envisaged in the summer, after signing 4 strikers, is come January being desperate to sign a centre forward. But then, and permanent, because of that, permanent transfers were always extremely unlikely, weren't they? So then you're looking at the loan market. And we've talked about this, myself and Scott Wilson, with Boro a lot over the last few weeks. In previous years, there's been pretty obvious loan players to come from the Championship every year. Falarin Balogun, Aaron Conley's gone on loans. Cameron Archer last year. Amad Diallo, I know he's not a centre forward, but he was one last year. Joe Gellart last year, obviously Sunderland side. There's been various obvious examples. There was a shortage of those obvious loanees this year. Kiefer Moore really was the only one. And that's why there was 9-10 championship clubs in for him. And that's why money ultimately was always going to talk. And this isn't the first time. Was it a year ago that Ipswich signed Broadhead? And at that stage, they blew championship clubs out of the water. So Ipswich outspending championship clubs is nothing new. They're being bold. It's the same with Hull. What's interesting is what happens if they don't go up this year. What's the knock-on effect down the line?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting one, you mentioned there, sorry to jump in, Matty, is Ryan Giles. I think that he's a very key one. You know, you didn't know what you're going to get from him because he did so well with Middlesbrough last season. And given Sunderland's shortage on that side of the pitch, he would have been absolutely ideal for what Sunderland need, how they play. Now, they brought Hjelde in. There's some sort of this conversation about whether is he a left-sided centre-back, is he a left-back? Obviously, he's going to go out as a left-back initially because of the injuries. He's probably one that's going to end up tucking inside when you read about him and you know, you look at him. Someone like Giles would have been perfect. And that is, again, going back to Matty's suggestion about the frustration in terms of, well, if Hull can bring someone like Giles in, why can't Sunderland bring someone like Giles in? You know, and that's something that would go for the striker situation as well.
It is, but then the suggestion is that Hull are going to be paying $4.5 million option in the summer. Like that's a big investment, isn't it? In January, I think at the start of the window, did anyone expect Sunderland to be paying £4.5 million for a striker? But then what it comes down to, as we said at the start, what it comes down to is Sunderland are left. It's how great the need. It's that balance, isn't it, of how great the need is, while clearly only bringing in the right deals and the right players. Sunderland are left with 3 strikers, and only 2 of them have scored a single goal each. One of them is yet to score. There's now a pressure. I think now what's going to be interesting now is I think now the emphasis switches to Beale's coaching, and not really coaching, more his man management, really, and how he handles these players and tries to get the best out of them. Because he's going to have to now, isn't he? In recent weeks, he's tinkered between the centre forwards without really knowing. Well, while always knowing in the back of his mind that he wants another one in. That's been clear. Now he knows he's not going to get one. He's going to have to get a tune out of these strikers that are currently on the books. So does he give one of them a run in the team? Like we've said, does he? How does he manage them individually? Mason Burstow, for example. I know Burstow said that it was never in his mind that he was going to go back to Chelsea, but we're all human, aren't we? He's had a rough first half of the year at Sunderland, hadn't scored. He's not playing. He's well aware Sunderland are looking for a striker. I'm sure that did cross his mind at some point. But there's clarity now. And Sunderland can only hope that clarity aids the cause of the strikers currently on the books. And just finally, from me, I think on this, Jack Clark staying clearly is a major positive. Because had we been sat here now talking about Sunderland having failed to bring in a striker and having lost Jack Clark in the last week's window, I mean, sounds like Laxio had to go for every English-born winger at some stage or other, didn't it, in the last week? Did that Ryan Kent deal collapse in the end? There were suggestions that was going to collapse in the final hours, but clearly keeping Clark now in the summer. I think it's looking increasingly likely that Clark moves on in the summer. But like signing a striker, replacing someone like Clark, and maybe Mundell's the replacement. Maybe the replacement's already in the building. But dealing with that is a hell of a lot easier in a summer window than it is a January window, isn't it?
Yeah, I think me and Matty touched on that yesterday as well in terms of the 3 that have come in. It strikes me as though all 3 could potentially be sort of succession plans for players who might end up leaving. You know, Mundell in for Clark, Styles possibly for a Dan Neil. You know, he's got the interest there. Seems as though he's a similar kind of player, nimble on the ball and tidy in possession, things like that. And then Hjelde for either Luke O'Nien getting through that age bracket of being 30. You know, we've seen players who've been moved on once they've sort of crossed over that border, despite how well he's done, or Dan Ballard moving on as well. You know, it feels like the 3 that have come in, because I mean, easy question that I would ask you: when everyone's fit, those 3 signings that have been made this window, would they go into starting lineup right now? I'm not sure whether they would.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Especially having not really watched any of them at this stage. I think the one that I'm most excited about of the three is Mundell, because I know Spurs wanted to keep him prior to his move to Standard Liège. All right, it didn't work out over there, but that's the thing, isn't it? You love those attacking players that are going to get you off your seat and score goals. Sunderland are well stocked, I think, further back. I think we all know that Jack Clarke's going to leave in the summer, and if sort of the fee that's been bandied about, like 30 odd million for Jack Clarke as an asking price in the summer, if Sunderland were to get anywhere near that value, that would be an incredible piece of business if they were to get that. At the minute, there's talks of £15 million being rejected. I think Sunderland's got every right to turn around and say, yeah, we're not accepting that. You look at the lad from Southampton who's just joined Juventus, that Alcaraz. I think that's, 40 million rising to 45 or something. I mean, Jack Clarke's got more goal contributions from what I've looked at earlier this year than Alcaraz has.
Well, I think the Adam Wharton. I was just about to say the Adam Wharton deal. There's always every couple of years there's a championship deal that becomes a measuring stick, I think. Isn't it? I haven't seen loads of Wharton, admittedly, but right now, if you were to have either Adam Wharton or Jack Clarke in your team, I'd be choosing Clarke.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is, and what's still kind of the great unknown with Sunderland is what happens when there is a major sale like a Clarke or a Neil or a Ballard or whoever else. There's several players, isn't there, who could go for big money at some stage. So we were talking there about Ryan Giles, 4.5, 5 million. I think there's probably a general acceptance that Sunderland were never going to offer that for a player this month. If you were to get north of £20 million for Jack Clarke, suddenly then the question's asked, well, how much of this now is going to go back into reinvesting in the squad? And Mowbray talked about this a few times, didn't he, in his last few weeks? What he'd like to see, he said, down the line is if a Jack Clarke goes for 20, 25 million, going and spending a third of that on one player or half of that, like is that like me with my Football Manager head on the game? I mean, not pretending to be Tony Mowbray, or do you think that would be the general expectation from support? You would certainly expect it to be a show of ambition after a big sale like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I agree with you, Dom. I agree.
Yeah, I think we speak about it before, Matty. I think we used Tottenham as a reference when they sold Gareth Bale all them years ago. Getting 80 million or whatever it was for him, and then sort of scattergunning it a little bit. That's kind of, I mean, people go back and ask about the Ross Stewart money in the summer, but Job came in for a fee. Nazari Rusin came in for a fee. There was a fee without Sheesh. They spent a reported 2 million on Mundell this window, 2 million on Yelda this window. So that money has been invested around the squad, but I totally agree. If you're going to bring in the kind of fee that's rumoured for Jack Clarke and what he probably will bring, 25 million, say, you're probably going to have to step that up and bring in a player for sort of in the 5 to 10 million bracket, for example, because that'll be kind of what supporters will expect at that point if you're losing someone who's brought as much as what he's brought. I mean, you're talking about a player here who is near enough 1 in 2 in terms of a goal contribution over 100 games. Absolutely, it's incredible the numbers that he's put up since the return to the Championship after the loan spell was made permanent. So yes, we're getting ahead of ourselves talking down the line here, but the 2 windows that have gone on like this season, there is a little bit of concern. Will that happen? Because this is
I think that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The beauty of the model is that we are so early on in it. Ross Stewart has really only been the only big name departure in that time, and he came in for nowhere near the fee that they've sold him for. So those signs are positive, in my opinion. That are there, and it's good to see that there's a succession plan in place. Obviously, you run the risk of, because of the model, how do you get young players to fulfill the potential? That's always a gamble. But as we've seen in League One, bringing in seasoned players who've been there and done it doesn't always translate to success on the pitch. It's a really interesting dynamic that I think Sunderland are going for. And as they've said, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But as we've touched on there, I think if, just to go back to Dom's point where, yeah, I've probably sat there with my football manager head on at times and thought, oh, well, they could go down this sort of route and reinvest. But like you say, Joe, they have reinvested in the squad, which has been good to see. I think the only frustration, as we've seen this year, is that when those signings don't come off or hit the ground running, you're suddenly left questioning it, aren't you? All 4 strikers, for example, yet to score at one point in the season. Now you've got 2 with 1 each.
I thought Speakman's admission was interesting when last week when he basically said we maybe need to be a bit more open and transparent with our expectations of these players. I get that. I completely get that. But if you're bringing 4 strikers in, you can't have the same the belief with everyone is that, right, these are going to take time and we might not see the best of them this year, but we might see the best of them next season. Surely one of those strikers needs to be ready to hit the ground running, or you are just going to be left like they've been left this month, scrambling around for another one. I think you touched on the succession planning. Clearly, the evidence of this will only come to light in the years ahead. But if you look at like the Brighton and Brentford models that are often stood up as those to follow, what they've done so well over the years is they've known when to sell players and they've had replacements in the building. Now, when you look at those players who've come in, they do all look like players who could potentially be replacements for those who might well leave in the summer or beyond. The beauty of it is Mundell, for example. If he comes in the summer after Jack Clark goes, he is immediately Jack Clark's replacement and all the pressure that comes with that. Now he's got 5-6 months to find his feet. That area of the pitch is probably where Sunderland are strongest. So you can blood him slowly and get him to grips. Although I think he has the look of being a really exciting signing, and he knows the English game, clearly, having spent most of his life at Tottenham before moving to Standard Liège. The hope would then be that the kick on in the summer. The only thing with that is we'd have probably been saying the same about Abdullah Bar and Jewison Burnett this time last year. And I think you look at the examples of Bar and Burnett, they're probably, maybe Bar has progressed a little, but they're probably in a similar position as they were 12 months ago.
Yeah, it's the argument of balancing the here and now out against looking ahead to the future, and that is again going full circle about the sort of frustration that supporters might feel coming out of this window. Have they got the balance right between attacking this final 17 games of the season and giving themselves a good chance of getting into the playoffs and then getting promoted, or is it kind of always looking ahead? Now, I totally get it, and I think I agree with what you've just said there, Dom, about Mundell with Clark. That is the right way to do it in terms of giving him the 6 months to bed in, sort of see how Clark goes about his business, and then that is kind of what he's going to have to step into next year, but not necessarily at the detriment of the here and now, which has been the case, as we've said, over the last 12 months.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, just before we obviously answer that one, just don't forget to subscribe on a YouTube channel if you're watching over there, and don't forget to take advantage of our launch offer where it's still £1 for just 6 months of coverage. So sorry, Joe, go on.
I was just going to say, obviously you're at the Academy of Light this afternoon speaking to Michael Beale. It'll be interesting how he approaches it, because the indication, well, you would expect him to kind of give the party line, but he didn't this time last week, did he? when he came out firing. So it'll be interesting to see what he says and how he deals with it this afternoon, I think, especially with the striker, because it's on him now, ultimately.
Yeah. You wonder how he feels, because, he'll have been hoping, like most would have been, that a striker did come in, and that, like exactly what you say, the onus is going to fall on him now to get them firing. Now, one thing about him is he has sort of, whether it's been, he's rotated them around, there hasn't been consistency in terms of which one, but he has fielded a striker more often than not, it's felt, than what we've seen previously, sort of under Mowbray, where it's gone to the sort of false 9 with the number 10 going in, hasn't it? He has been a little bit more persistent in I know it's only early days, 1 or 2 games aside, but yeah, there's pressure on him, and as we spoke about again on Monday, he's only ever 1 defeat away from being right back in the firing line again. That feels as though that's going to kind of be how his tenure's going here, certainly until he gets consistency in terms of real running results as well.
Yeah, that leads us on to Sunday. I was going to say that we touched on this, I think, earlier this week, didn't we, Joe? It does have the feel with Beale at the minute that he's always 2 games away from a crisis. Really, he'll always be 2 defeats away from the kind of unwanted questions. Saturday against Stoke was good, was really impressive. But if Sunday doesn't go to plan, then the spotlight turns firmly on Beale once more, doesn't it? Regardless of what's happened this week off the pitch.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, you wonder whether some of that, if it was to go the wrong way on Sunday, whether some of them might go above him towards Speakman, because for what we've been speaking about over the last half an hour, the way the transfer window has gone, if you kind of you'll get an idea straight away what the mood around the camp's like going into that on Sunday. It's a strange one, isn't it? Because Sunderland's record down at the Riverside is notoriously not very good, but it could also be one of those games that could end up being a perfect game for them, because if they were to go down there and get a result, what a platform that could be moving on, coming out of the window as well.
I think it's a big game for both sides for that reason. This feels to me like the start of the final running. Really, there's been a break between games. Obviously, Sunderland have had a week. Boro have had 11 games because their game against Birmingham was postponed last week. There's clarity now with the squad. Everyone knows where they stands. It feels like the final stretch starts here. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just to sort of bring it full circle, obviously, we've seen Sunderland set up a specific way away from home, and against Hull, Ipswich, they didn't actually field a striker. So, it was Bradley, Dack and Job when they went into a 4-2-4 and pressed high. It was Pritchard and Job at Portman Road. We've obviously been calling for continuity, but then do we see Beale go back to that? Because looking at things, that's probably been... Has it been? It's hard to say because it's been effective in game. So, but then you lose Burstow when you see Burstow drop out. It's whether he thinks these strikers are able to play that, because as you say, this is the beginning of the business end now. I think everything that's gone on before, Beale was keen to draw a line under it and say, look, we're moving forward from now. But as you say, Joe, if they don't get a result, people are going to start asking questions again of the model.
Yeah, I agree with that. But at the same time, if Burstow wasn't to start, I think Beale's opening himself up to criticism there. If he was to go down that route, what you've just mentioned, and sort of start Job in there with another, rather than Burstow off the back of a goal, it would feel as though he'd be making a rod for his own back. For me, based on the fact he scored, and these are the strikers that he's got in the building, to then not start one who scored off the back of the window, that it would speak volumes, and it would open a really big can of worms for me if Burstow, well, one of them, but probably Burstow, doesn't start on Sunday.
Just to play devil's advocate to that, though, before we bring it to an end, what happens if they win though and they haven't? Do you know what I mean? It's if they come away with 3 points and then he tactically gets it right and they come away from a
that's another question. Yeah, that is. I mean, if that was to happen, but I think on the face of it, if the team sheet lands, I think there will be a collective sort of what's kind of going on from that away end, thinking, well, why it'll go again to why didn't Sunderland bring a striker in over the last month, and then it just kind of opens up. Speakman talks about being aligned within the club. Are they aligned? Are Beale and Speakman aligned? If that's happening, letting the striker go out and then the 3 that you've got, you're not going to play one of them. It'll be interesting. That is one to look out for. Before the team sheet lands on Sunday and that. But it's been the case all season, hasn't it? Every week it's kind of who's going to start this week. It's been a merry-go-round on the striker front. Who's going to start? Is it going to be an out-and-out striker or is it going to be a midfielder? And that kind of tells you how they're going to play as well. So it's no different, and that is probably another frustration with the window, isn't it? That is going to be the theme again throughout these final 17 games of the season.
I know. I'm aware, obviously, that of how he's set up in the recent away games, but I'd be staggered if he didn't start a striker on Sunday, because I think, forget the tactical element to it. I think on a human kind of managing the emotions of the players, if you were to not start Burstow after he scores his first goal and after Sunderland fail to sign a striker? Is it not an admission of a lack of faith? Like, how can you drop him after failing to sign a striker and Burster scoring his first goal? If you then drop him, how can you then realistically expect to get something out of him, the best out of him going forward? I think the kind of man management has to take priority in that sense. I know Beale would always say that he picks the team, he picks the best team to win a game. But I'd be amazed if he didn't start a striker on Sunday. And I think, as you say there, Joe, if he didn't, he runs the risk of opening a complete new can of worms. And I didn't think there was any more cans of worms to open when it came to Sunderland centre forward situation over the course of the last year or so.
Yeah, and that's just, like you say, I mean, that is just that situation itself. It's a big game anyway. You know, you get the whole derby sort of debate every time this fixture comes around, but there's no doubt it's a significant game. Regardless, it is one that has more onus on it than the other sort of 44 in the Championship season. From a Boro point of view, what do you think? Sort of, you know, we've spoken about Jack Clarke going. Obviously, they've allowed Morgan Rogers to go. How does that impact their setup going into facing Sunderland, do you think?
Boro are in an interesting position because Boro wanted a striker as well this month or last month, and Boro didn't get one. The difference is Boro, Josh Coburn and Emmanuel Latte-Lath haven't been short of goals, but they've had injury problems. Latte-Lath has been injured since the first Chelsea game. Coburn's managing an ongoing groin problems, so Carrick's had to juggle that, and Rogers played as a striker a few times in recent weeks. Rogers is an interesting one because he's scored 7 goals in all competitions. He's clearly a huge talent, but he couldn't get a start a month ago. And Boro have just made the deal's worth a total of £16 million for a player who's only made 14 starts for him, and they signed for £1 million in the summer. And a week or so earlier, they signed Finn Azaz from Aston Villa. Now, Azaz wasn't signed to be a replacement for Rogers. The Rogers interest came out the blue. But Azaz scored 7 goals for Plymouth in the first half of the season. If you were looking at probably the standout number 10s in the Championship in the first half of the season, I think Azaz is in the mix. So you've got Azaz at 10. Marcus Forss is fit again. You've got Isaiah Jones, though he's injured. Sam Greenwood, who's obviously well known to Sunderland. And then you've got Riley McGree and Sammy Silvera to come back from the Asian Cup duty. So although Rogers has gone, the general feeling is that's a good deal for Boro, a really good deal for Boro. And they've still got loads of options in that area. The question is the fitness of the strikers, Coburn and Latte-Lath, and that'll be the big question for Carrick this afternoon. How long is Latte-Lath going to be out for? Can Coburn handle regular football in the second half of the season? If the answers to both of those are positive, then Boro look pretty well set. That's the question. Just to finish on Boro, Boro have been better away than at home. They've actually got identical records in terms of wins, draws, and defeats, home and away this season. But I think they've scored 15 goals at home and 28 away, or something like that, without double checking. They're more suited to playing kind of on the counter away from home. The problem they've had at home is although they're very comfortable in possession, having to kind of pick the lock of a team has been difficult. They've got 1 point out of 6 against Rotherham. And I think they had something like 38 shots on target, 38 shots on goal over the course of 2 games, and scored 1 late goal, which shows you the kind of issues they are having. But Sunderland aren't going to come and sit deep and set out to stifle and frustrate and make life difficult for them. I think it's a really interesting tactical battle. I think it's fascinating to see how it plays out.
I think the Jones one is interesting. I don't know what you think about that, Matty, but we've spoken about the value of Jack Clarke and how good he's been in the last couple of games with Middlesbrough. Jones has had Clarke's number, so him being absent would be a big boost. It would feel as though that would be a big boost for Sunderland and for Clarke to go and attack that area if Jones is missing.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The tactical approach on Clarke from Boro. Like, Dom said there, I'm expecting a good tactical battle. It's two young coaches, isn't it, who are going up against each other. I feel like, Michael Carrick's building quite the rep now, whereas Michael Beale still probably has a point to prove. We've seen teams double up on Clark. I thought the last game against Stoke was one of Clark's best, not of the season, but in the past month or so. He's popped up with goals, that have won Sunderland points. But yeah, that's the one thing I'd say about Sunderland is, and it's been a common theme throughout the season, is the need more from those players around Clark. There's been one or two games just over the festive period where I feel like Clark's tried to do it maybe all himself. He's tried, maybe just overran it a little bit. But you could see when they went, 2 and 3 goals up against Stoke, there was a bit of swagger there. You felt like they were a bit more free flowing. So whether they're able to carry that into the Boro game, it'll be very interesting. I think, again, the setup, because Liam Rossignol at Hull over Boxing Day said that he expected Sunderland to come out and play high pressing, and they didn't. They came with a mid block. So if Michael Beale's seen that Boro are struggling against lower blocks, I don't think we would be too out of the question to see Sunderland change, tactical approach for down there.
If Jones is out, which is probably likely, then it's likely to be Marcus Forss playing on the right. But Luke Ayling signed from Leeds in January, and he's likely to play right back. And that'll be an interesting battle because Ayling knows all the tricks of the trade, doesn't he? And I think he'll relish a battle against someone like Clark. I think that side feels pivotal, doesn't it? On the other side, Boro signed Luke Thomas on loan from Leicester, but I'd expect Lucas Engel to start there. And then the midfield battle as well. We've talked about this in the past, but Hayden Hackney and Dan Neil, two midfielders, obviously homegrown players with massive futures. I always enjoy seeing them two go at it.
Yeah, just on Neil and Ayling, both at Leeds together as well, weren't they, for a period, I think. So that makes that extra interesting as well. I think just on Hackney and Dan Neil, I mean, I've watched both this season and there's absolutely no surprise that there's been Premier League clubs watching both of them. I mean, Dan Neil in the past couple of weeks has been one of, if not Sunderland's standout performer, in my opinion. Just some of the work he's done. He's been asked to play different roles in midfield. Off the ball, he played a deeper role, which freed up Ekwa against Stoke. And I just think, yeah, it's not everything you do in a game comes off, but he's playing with real confidence at the minute. I don't know what Hackney's currently like at Boro, Dom, but Neil at the minute has been top draw for me.
Yeah, Hackney, I know I'm kind of labouring a point that all Boro have made on a number of occasions, but it's remarkable to think he wasn't in the plans under Chris Wilder, and then Michael Carrick came in and put him in, and he signed 2 new contracts within 6 months. There was never really any fears about Hackney going this month, but I suspect there'll be interest in the summer if he continues in his current trend. He actually struggled in the game at Chelsea, in the Carabao Cup game against Chelsea last week, but tactically it just didn't work for Boro, and they were exploited all over the pitch. But yeah, he's had a huge breakthrough, and he's Boro's key man. He makes Boro tick in the midfield. Every time he gets the ball, he's positive. He looks to go forward. He's the one who sets the tone really, and everything goes through. And being a Boro fan, having grown up in Redcar down the road, this game will mean a lot to him. I suspect he'd be keen to make the point that it is a derby to Boro and all concerned.
Yeah, keeping 10 men on the pitch from a Sunderland point of view would be pretty good as well after the last one where Daniel was sent off. I mean, it is, people will stress the point that it's a derby. What do you think about it, Joe?
No, I agree with what you're saying there. I think it's hard to look into that game back at the Stadium Alive because of that incident. That was such a pivotal incident, and for what Neil was sent off for, it totally changed the game. I think Mowbray tried to attack it with 10 men, and you could see within a few minutes of that first half that it just wasn't going to work, and they got picked apart. I don't think it'll be. You see, you can't really use that as a yardstick this weekend. But it's two teams who feel as though they kind of on similar paths at the minute. I think there's 3 points separating them at the moment. Both kind of obviously at the start of the season, they'll set the stall out saying the promotion is what we want, but they kind of just sort of middling around a little bit, and it feels at the moment as though both will probably come up short. I don't know if you agree with that, Dom, in terms of even despite what might happen on Sunday, it just feels as though there's just something just not quite there for both that might mean they might miss out on the top 6 this season.
Yeah, I think if you were to pick your top 6 now, I think the top 4 look set. West Brom look pretty strong and stable, don't they? And I think you'd put Coventry and maybe Hull now after their January business as most likely to get 6th. With Boro had a rotten start. Obviously, there were 7 games winless at the start of the season, and then they've had a brutal injury record as well. The kind of feel at Boro now is they've got the big players back, most of the players back really, and they're well set to kick on in the second half of the season. But it still feels as though it might be next season when you see the best of this Boro side, and I think that's the same with Sunderland, isn't it? Although with the obvious question marks of what happens to several key players like Clark and Neil and Ballard and Patterson and whoever else in the summer. But both Boro and Sunderland, I think, will be looking at it and thinking, if we can string a run together, if we can string 3 or 4 wins together and build some momentum, then there's nothing to say we can't get in those playoff places.
No, that's it. It's consistency, isn't it? It's consistency for both teams. I think that's the one that's the issue that has kind of stifled them both at times. I see certainly Sunderland, they just haven't been able to really get going from what we saw last year. Or it feels that way, doesn't it, mate?
Yeah, I know Boro went on a little bit of a run after they went on that terrible run of form just to drag them away from the relegation zone. But that's it for me, isn't it? I mean, Sunderland's consistency this year, they need a run of games, even if they don't win consecutively, just string together an unbeaten run of games. If that's a scrappy, if that's a 1-1 draw at Rotherham, for example, in the middle of a prolonged run of games where you're winning, keeping clean sheets, even picking up points on the road, I just think that builds confidence, stands you in good stead, especially with how few games we have left now.
Yeah, and just like kind of to finish up, I think what Dom said earlier, it's almost a clean slate, and it's difficult for Michael Beale because off the back of such a good win against Stoke and a good performance, undoubtedly the best of his tenure, that has kind of like been parked now, and it's almost as though you can't really tap into that because you have the end of the window, and then it feels just like a complete separate start again. It does feel like a clean slate, and like I said, it's a game where you almost think it can be such a good springboard from a Sunderland point of view, or probably from a Middlesbrough point of view as well, but certainly from a Sunderland point of view, if you can go to the Riverside and get a result, it could be a really big platform because then you can tap back into the Stoke result and think, oh, well, start of a run here. And then that kind of can park the transfer window a little bit as well. So it's a big game for a number of reasons for me.
Yeah, that's great. We'll wrap it up there just because I'm aware of how long we've spoken about this morning. But thanks for joining me, Dom. Thanks for joining me, Joe. You can subscribe to We Are Sunderland's £1 for just 6 months of coverage. We'll be bringing you more from the January transfer window, the fallout over there, some analysis of the incoming players. We'll be hearing from Michael Beale later this afternoon ahead of that trip to Boro. So if you're watching over on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe, like the channel, leave a comment, let us know what you think. We've had plenty of feedback so far, and it's all much appreciated. So we will catch you on Monday after the game.
Cheers, lads.
Ta-da.